Hi, I'm Sid. How are you? So a couple of weeks ago, I actually finished reading Best of Gold by Joe Abercrombie, which is, I think, the first standalone in First Law universe. And I think at this point, I've collected enough. I've collected my thoughts enough to the point where I can probably make a good review. Yeah, that's why I'm here. So this is actually my first review where it's either non-scripted and has no notes beforehand. Otherwise, if it's not scripted, then I usually just make bullet points. But this time, I'm just trying out not writing anything beforehand and just giving you my raw, unfiltered thoughts. I did read the first trilogy back in 2024, I think at about June, and I read all three back to back with This Is How You Lose the Time War in between book two and three, and I really loved it. It ended up becoming my fourth favorite series of all time, right behind Discworld, and it blew me away, especially the ending, because it had one of the best endings I think I've ever read to a series or a trilogy as a whole. So that's why it's up there. And because of that, I was really excited to get to this book. It's taken me a while to get here. I got this book like God knows how long back, but though it was worth the wait because now this book single-handedly bumped up First Law from the fourth place to the third place, overtaking Discworld, which, if you know me, is a big deal because I love Discworld. Why did it go up? Well, I mean, it's not because I thought it was better than the original trilogy. I've kind of waffled back and forth on it. I think in the end, this is a 4 star, maybe a 4.5 stars. Uh, but it doesn't quite beat the original trilogy for me because, well, there's a couple of reasons, but I do think as a whole, the story of the original trilogy is stronger. Plus, in my mind, I kind of think of the original trilogy as one large book because of how I read it, which is what I'm planning to do with Age of Madness currently. Um, but the reason it got bumped up is because it was still a great book, and because of that, it has a much more consistent track record with me than compared to Discworld. Because with Discworld, you have a couple books that I really enjoy, which are like Guards, and Mort, and some books that I absolutely love, which are Reaperman, Small Gods, and Men at Arms, and a couple that I think are mediocre, specifically The Color of Magic and Light Fantastic. Whereas with First Law, everything has blown me away completely, and even if this is a little less than compared to the original trilogy, it's still a really high bar. That's why it's up here. So there we go. So I think from there we should get into the characters, which obviously is a big strong suit for Abercrombie. Honestly, I would put many of the characters in this book up on par with the original trilogy, and that's not a small thing because the trilogy was obviously very good at character work, especially with most of the main characters, and this book is no less because it maintains many of the hallmarks of Abercrombie's writing. Specifically, God, there's one character who's such a bad person, but you can't help but love reading him, and he's also the funniest character in the whole book. His name is Morvier. I will not say anything else beyond that, but but he is such a delight, and I hate him. The main character too. I can't speak much about her, but she is also a really great character, along with some of the characters that they brought back from the original trilogy. Because yes, there are ties to the original trilogy in this book, and it's done in a really natural way. Like, for example, one of the main characters is a bit of a side character from the original trilogy who showed up a lot in, I think, Logan's perspectives and the Dogman's. Um, the original. Why can't I just say the original? In the original trilogy, um, and he had a really great transformation throughout the whole book, for better or for worse. I will not say, but uh, it was something, I'm I'm excited to see because I know he does appear in books beyond this, and I'm excited to see where he goes after this because the journey that what happened to him in this book was it was something. I'll tell you that much. Uh, and those ties to the original trilogy are there, and they never do feel unnatural. Many of the characters, another one of not a main character, but one of the main group is again from the original trilogy. more of a side character, but uh, and she got some more added stuff to her character, which was nice. And some of the side characters were okay. The main characters are really where it shines, but even then, some of the side characters were really well written, in my opinion. Not quite as well, obviously, but still really well written. There's another character, Koska, who I absolutely loved in this book. He was also there in the original trilogy, but this book was really where I fell in love with him because the fandom really seemed to love him even back in the original trilogy. But and I didn't really get why. But when reading this book, he's great. He's great. And another thing that this book really surprised me with is, considering the subgenre of grimdark, you would not sorry, just you would not expect to really connect with a character dynamic. Um, but there was one dynamic between two characters that really gripped me, and honestly, towards the end, had a very heartfelt moment that I quite enjoyed. So characters, again, it's a strong suit of Abercrombie's writing that does not change here whatsoever. Uh, and it ties into a lot of the themes because I think Mr. Britton from Some Hockey Dude, he criticized a bit of this book for having repetitive themes from the original trilogy, and while that is true to an extent, uh, it very much works for the story, and I think it's still done very well here. So that's not much of a negative form for me, uh, because it does into stuff. Specifically, it does a lot with intermanipulation, how individuals can be manipulated by others, how individuals can be manipulated by popular opinion, forced into decisions they don't want to make, but they have to because they believe it's the only option they can take and still make it out alive, or make it out with some without losing a lot. And along with individuals manipulating groups, which is more the original trilogy, but it's still present here. So it does carry a lot of themes from the original trilogy, but it does so very well. I'll say that much. Uh, yeah, and within the lens of characters, the the dialogue, of course, with Abercrombie again. Since since my exams ended, I've been trying, and the new year started. I've been trying to have more insight into dialogue and prose with the books I read, because that's been a bit of a blind spot for me in past years. And with my reading, I chose the perfect books to start the year off with. I started with Discovery and I started with this, and these two are books that, by the way, review for Discovery coming soon. But these two are books that excel in the dialogue department, where they're able to convey character extremely quickly to you using the dialogue, and can be extremely funny with the dialogue while sticking to the character very closely. So, and it was just so fun to read the dialogue a lot of the times. So that really added to my enjoyment of the book. So I think that's all I have to say on characters for now.
Hi, editing Sid here. I'm Daniel Greening for a bit. Yes, Daniel Greening. It's a word I made up for, you know what it is. You watch Daniel Green, but I can't believe that I actually forgot to talk about the actual main character of the book in this review. So I'll consider that this my mistake being rectified. And I've heard a lot about people who think Monza is uninteresting as a character, and well, while I can kind of see where they're coming from, I tend to disagree in various notions because uh, Monza is a character of whom the conflict doesn't come from her. Like, the book raises a lot of moral dilemmas, but the conflict with Monza is less so just not conflict. The interesting part about Monza is less so that she is less so that she is considering these moral dilemmas throughout the whole book, but rather that she isn't, in the sense that she is so driven, she is so single-minded on these topics, and she's driving towards one full revenge plot being completed without really thinking through the ramifications. Really, she will do anything just to spite. um, just despite those that have wronged her. Even towards the end of the book, she makes more and more decisions that more and more decisions just out of spite, and you will see what that is if you have read the book, and if you will read the book. And along with that, it really just shows the single-mindedness in that, and it also discusses like, can you really go back when you've gone too far? So many decisions throughout the book, and that's what I think makes Monza an interesting character. I think I'll have to think more about that to really give a more detailed look into her character, but that's as much as I can provide right now. But uh, she does provide a very good insight into a lot of the ideas that Abercrombie presents on morality, which, if you know Abercrombie, you know exactly what he thinks based on just the first trilogy alone. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. I think from there I need to get into plot. And the plot is up there as the characters as probably one of the best aspects of this book because it was really fast paced. It was a really quick read. And whenever I sat down, I could easily knock out as much as I wanted in as little time as possible because it was very well written. The prose was really great. But that doesn't mean that the plot was exactly slow. In fact, this is probably a lot faster than most of Abercrombie's books, especially ones that I've read so far. And I can't speak for the other two standalones or um, Age of Madness, but this was much faster. At least from my memory, this was much faster paced than as compared to the first Law trilogy, and it was really hard to put down at times. So um, that's why plot is one of my favorite aspects. Another thing is I mean, just the overall structure of the book lends it a kind of flow that really works very well for it because it's divided into multiple parts and there's no time wasted on the journeys in between the various areas. Whenever something is completed in one area, then immediately the next part just starts off right there. So that probably gives it a sense of flow that really helps it in various ways. So that's one thing. Another thing, the action in this book is really well handled. Like many a time, action usually isn't my favorite part of a book. Uh, Sometimes it's it many a time it actually detriments and takes away from a book. That's why Sunlit Man is my least favorite Cosmere book because it's my because it is probably the most action packed, and because of that I just found the plot really unengaging. And uh, for some reason, A Memory of Light can't be my favorite Wheel of Time book because of the amount of action. Because while it's still a great book, I give it basically a 10 out of 10. Uh, it, the action kind of takes away from it. In this book, the action adds to it a lot because Abercrombie can write action and he can do it really damn well. Uh, and that's not something that I've seen talked about a lot because really it almost has a cinematic kind of quality to it because when you read an Abercrombie action scene, well, it feels like you can see it in your mind, and that's that probably the grimdark aspect of it really probably helps with that because it gives it a visceral kind of sense that an unclean kind of thing that a lot of fantasy series don't have because they kind of sanitize. Most fantasy series have a more sanitized kind of way of dealing with action, whereas Abercrombie just goes for every single blow in the most realistic, gritty possible way. So there we go. That's the action in the scene is, and he has a specifically way of writing action too, which just gives it again. I'm going to say the word flow a bunch of times, but it really does lend the action a flow. Like the writing style is basically perfect. Like he has it down to an art the way that he writes his action scenes. So there we go. Especially the fighting scenes, the action scenes that are one on one or just a small group against another small group. Big battles don't tend to really grab me as much. Abercrombie could write that. I have no doubt about it. He did. He wrote a fair amount of that in the third first law book. But in this book, a lot of those one-on-one fights just are amazing. The main action scenes that really jumped out at me are are these one of the action scenes that happened about midway through the book, which was really well written. That went on for about 20 pages, but it was perfect. the whole way. Actually, I'm not sure. I don't remember if it went on for 20 pages, how long it went on, but it was really well written. It's probably one of the best action scenes I've ever read in my life, and multiple action scenes towards the end because the third act handled that aspect of it really well, and so many twists and turns throughout this whole book. The plot was really strong, so that's what I'll say about that. Um, Adding to that, really, I know many a person actually says that the play itself, they criticize it for not having much of a plot. I disagree with that, but this book, the plot really was a big step up. Not a step up because I do think that the original trilogy was still very good with its plotting, but this book was still maybe even better than that in terms of plotting. Um, Things might vary on a reread of the original trilogy, but which I'm not going to get to yet. But uh, in terms of that, the plot it's really tight. It works really well, and yeah, that's. I think I've said my piece on the plot. So from there, I think I should get into the world building aspect. And usually, world building is the aspect that I care least about in Abercrombie's books because, quite frankly, it's not a focus for him as an author. At least that's what it seems to be to me, and it doesn't seem to. And it that kind of stays consistent with this book. But there are many things that I'd like to talk about with world building. World building is the least important aspect out of the three plot characters and world building. It is the least important to me, but there's still some stuff I'd like to say. Uh, well, even if Abercrombie isn't particularly focused on world building, he is very good at using the world that he's created to convey maybe the themes that he wants to push, the vibes, the feelings that he wants to get out, and he's very good at doing that with the world. And this is something again that's carried over from the original trilogy. Uh, Along with that, this book gives us a view into a part of the world that we haven't really seen much of before in the original trilogy, because the original trilogy mostly focused on the Union, the North, the and the Gurkish. I don't Gurkland. What was it called? The Gurkish Empire. So that whereas this one has a heavy focus on Styria, which is a place that's been mentioned multiple times in the original trilogy, but this book really did a great job at fleshing that out, and it used a lot of the political aspects that Styria is involved in, a lot of the tensions that arise between various parts of Styria, the motivations of its leaders, all that kind of stuff, and the uh, views of the people to really create a very good backdrop for the story. So, in that respect, I think the world building of this book is also really well handled. So, I think it's time I give my overall thoughts, the final conclusion to this, because I love this book. It is a very easy 4.5 stars for me. It was a great read, and I am looking forward to getting into the rest of the series. Like before this, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do an Abercrombie book a month because that there's a lot of stuff I want to get to. But this book completely convinced me. Next month, I'm going to be doing both the Heroes and Red Country back to back, and well, in June, which is the 1 year anniversary of me having started the original trilogy in June, I will be reading the entire Age of Madness trilogy back to back. And I'm very excited for Age of Madness because that is a series that I've heard is probably even better than First Law, which is high praise. So because of that, this completely upended my TBR and I can't wait to read more. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I will smell you later.